Check out this clip from Pressbox Access host Todd Jones's conversation with Philadelphia-based sports writer Bob Ford. Bob recalls getting to know Charles Barkley and shares who he really is.
If you were around a guy named Charles Barkley, who we all know now as this big teddy bear of a TV announcer and funny, and he always has been funny, and a hell of a player, obviously, back in his day. But you covered Charles pretty much every day for 4 years. Where does Charles Barkley rank in memorable athletes that you covered in your career?
Number one, without question. The 4 years of that I covered Charles every day before they traded him, which flew by like they were 20 years, by the way, was just amazing. Number one, as you said, he's become this caricature, and people under whatever age think of him as this jovial guy, doing commercials and yucking it up with Shaq on TNT. He was a force to be reckoned with. Was the shortest guy ever to lead the league in rebounding. He was listed as 6'6". He's 6'4.5", and he was in the top 10 rebounding every year, and led it one year. And
Right.
And everybody else on the list was 6'10", 6'11", and he had this natural brilliance for rebounding that it's almost hard to explain. He just knew where the ball was going to come off. When he was still in college, when he was at Auburn, he was going through a little rebounding slump, and one of the assistant coaches, he says, I'm having trouble getting rebounds, and the assistant coach says, well, that's because you're boxing out. And Charles says, well, aren't you supposed to box out? And the coach said, shit, no, just go get the ball. And so, and that suited Charles just fine. And that was because it was less work. So that was his philosophy for the rest of his life. He just went and got the ball. So he averaged more rebounds per game over his career, more than a 1,000-year career, than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I mean, this guy was amazing. Wow. And he scored 22 points a game for his career. So that part of it, people have forgotten. 11-time All-Star, 11-time All-NBA. And there were all the jokes about him being heavy. Coming out of college, he was, before he got into shape. The Crisco kid and round mound and rebound and all that stuff. But he was a cut 250 in his prime, when I was covering him. And he was someone, when he came rattling down the lane with the ball, people got out of the way. And so he was a force in that way. But he was just also the most outsized personality I've ever been around. And naturally hilarious, just an incredible sense of humor, and had a knack for doing very controversial things, sort of because he liked to court controversy. Dave Koski, who used to be the PR guy at the Sixers and went on to a really good advertising career, he said that most professional athletes are assholes that want you to think they're good guys, and Charles is a good guy who wants you to think he's an asshole. And that is absolutely 100%.
That's interesting.
Correct. Yeah.
Do you think he thrived on the chaos around it? Did it make him a better player? Almost like John McEnroe needed that energy, that chaos.
A little bit. I mean, he also he had a healthy ego. Probably still does. And he was the captain of that ship. He wasn't just the captain of the team. He was the captain of the ship, and he made sure everybody knew it. So, when Armand Gilliam came over, and Armand was sort of a soft power forward, they were always trying to figure out how to pair guys with Charles. Because a 6'4.5" power forward, what do you do? What do you do with the other forward? Do you want him to be a stretch guy who can go out and get away from the basket because Charles is there? Do you need a high post center? You got to figure that stuff out. So they had a whole bunch of different guys came through, including Armand Gilliam. And Armand Gilliam was this very sensitive guy. Guy who read books all the time and could play 5 instruments. But he was not exactly the most tenacious rebounder from Charles's standpoint. So like after a game, Charles would be sitting there with the box score, and he'd go, "Oh, Armand, you were bored tonight. You got one more rebound than a dead man." He would do that kind of stuff, and keep guys in their place. He and Manute Bol got into a fight was like a Japanese monster movie gone awry. It's just unbelievable.
Manute was like 7'6", right?
Manute was in fact 7'6", and Charles, those big mesh basketball bags that the teams used to have to carry around with them, like 10 balls, and he stuffed Manute in that bag one time and closed it up.
All right, give us your Charles Barkley greatest hits.
He had these wonderful routines he would do, and then I'll tell you a couple stories. But like he would torture the Sixers general manager, who at the time when I was covering was Gene Shue, who was an extremely well-regarded coach and player back in his time, and a front office guy. And Gene was sort of this craggy guy, and if you ever look up a picture of him on the internet, he kept this sort of long, modishly cut hair long after he should have, and he colored it. We colored it black, and he had this very craggy face that didn't go with the rest of that look. And so Charles called him one of two things. He either called him young Abe Lincoln, or the fifth Beatle. But he said, "Oh, I see the fifth Beatle went out and made a trade for us. They called me at home last night. They said, hey, we got Shaq. And I'm jumping around. Hey, we got Shaq. And I come to find out I got Charles Shackelford." And people always say Magic Johnson makes the guys around him better, and Charles didn't make any of his lift his players up or make anyone better around him. And you say, "Oh, that must be really tough making James Worthy better. I'd really hate to have that job." He was that kind
You sound just like him.
I haven't been around him for a while either. I used to be able to really do him.
Wasn't there a story about Charles and David Moore of the Dallas Morning News?
Oh God, yeah, David Moore, who's still at the Dallas Morning News, mostly does the Cowboys now, but back then he did an awful lot of Mavericks. He was an NBA writer and columnist, like an NBA columnist. So we were in. This is Charles's last year, and he was desperately trying to get traded. He didn't think the club was ever going to find a way to build around him, and it had been 8 years there, and it was time. Everyone had sort of come to the end of the rope. So we're in Dallas, and we're staying at the Reunion Hyatt, which is right next to the Reunion Arena. Very easy. You walk over and you walk back afterwards. And it was one of those times when it was a commercial flight the next day, so the players weren't chartering out right after the game like they do now. Mm-hmm. So David wrote a column that morning in the Dallas Morning News, and he just destroyed Charles. And it was the Sixers have to move past Charles Barkley. They got to trade this guy. He's nothing but a cancer on the team. He doesn't make anybody around him better, which everyone always said. And they're never going to go anywhere. They're never going to win anything. As long as they have Charles, they have to get rid of Charles Barkley. And it was even stronger than that. It went on for 800 words. It just left him bleeding in the gutter. So the game happens, and this is what we were talking about. I have no idea what happened in the game. And we walked back after the game to the Reunion Hyatt, and there was this big open atrium lobby bar where everybody would hang out after the game.
Funny that I remember a bar, but go ahead.
Yeah, I know. So David, who was at the game, comes back with me, and we're sitting at a table in that bar having a beer. And, all the players are milling around and the coaches and, a green fly here or there, normal people. But pretty much it was just our scene. And Charles, as he was wont to do, would come rambling through and stopping and saying hi to everybody. And he comes up to the table and he says, "Oh, hi, Bob. How you doing?" And I said, "Charles, here's a friend of mine I want to introduce you to." And David starts slinking down in his chair till like his chin is like even with the table.
Because Barkley was known to read everything, right?
Charles did not miss anything. I mean, if it had his name in it, he was going to read it. And so I said, "Yeah, Charles, my good friend, David Moore of the Dallas Morning News." And Charles leans over closer, just sort of like hovering over where David is rapidly disappearing into the Hyatt carpet. And he goes, "David Moore, David Moore of the Dallas Morning News. And he goes, man, you helping me get out of town. I'm going to buy you a beer. And he goes up to the bar and he buys like 6 bottles of Miller Lite. Charles was not a craft beer drinker. And brings back 6 bottles of Miller Lite, puts them on the table, pulls up a chair, and we proceeded to, shoot the shit for the next 30 minutes to 45 minutes, which was very typical of Charles. He would do that kind of stuff everywhere. But it was a classic. Just another day in the life of Charles Wade Barkley. So I'm in there one day, and Charles comes up to me, and he says, hey, Bob, how much can they fine me if I miss a day of practice? And I said, well, Charles, they can fine you up to $10,000 before you can grieve it to the Players Association. But what? What is going on? Yeah. And he says, well, there's this Japanese mattress company that wants me to fly to Tokyo and do a mattress commercial, and they're going to pay me $100,000. And the way I look at it, I'll be $90,000 ahead. And I said, Charles, it's the middle of the season. You can't fly to Tokyo and back in one day. And he said, oh yeah, you can, because they got that international date line. And I said, listen, it's not a time machine. That's not the way it works. You're not doing this. And not only are you not doing this, you're not telling anyone else about this. And he said, all right, I just thought I'd run it by you. And I have no idea how much he was putting me on or if he was putting me on, but that is all honest to God truth. But it did, in fact, happen that after the season, he went and pretended to sleep in Tokyo. He might not have pretended. He might have gone.
I like his math, though. I mean, he had a point, Bob.
He did have a point about the fine, but he did not have a point about the international date line. But that's
now, was Charles playing a character, or is that really who Charles was or is?
I think it was both. I think, when he pretended that he was going to run for governor of Alabama, for instance, and he had a whole lot of routines that went around that. I don't think Charles ever intended to run for the governorship of Alabama. But I thought that for one thing, he didn't live there. But
there's that.
There was that. And but I think it was his way of getting topics out or of talking about things that people didn't talk about in a humorous way. And he did love the state of Alabama. Obviously, he grew up there, grew up in Leeds, Alabama, went to Auburn. But he would say things like, because he said he was going to register as a Republican. And he said, my grandmother came to me and says, Charles, how can you register as a Republican? That's a party for rich people. And Charles said, Grandma, I'm rich.
Another good point by Charles.
Another good point. But he also said, I look at Alabama as 48th in the country in education and 49th in poverty and 47th in infrastructure. He says, now how the hell am I going to mess up Alabama? And he had a very good point there, but he was trying to put some light on the fact. Very logical. So yeah, I mean, he was a character, and he's obviously made it into. He's put helium in the balloon now as a TV guy. He's become this bigger than life character. And boy, for how many Hall of Fame players who played in the last 30 years are going to make more money after than during? And he has by far made more money after than during his career. But I do think that people thought I think he felt that he was overlooked a little bit as a basketball player because he never won a ring, and I think that ate at him a little bit. He came so close with Phoenix, MVP that year.